mass exodus in Ukraine is now the fastest growing refugee crisis since World War II. The protection of children is fueling the migration, but without families to turn to, some orphans in Ukraine are stuck in limbo and don't know what will come next.
During our first night at the bomb shelter, something had blown up in Poznyaki. The windows were shaking. My heart was racing. You are afraid that this bomb can hit you and it's going to be the end.
Joining us now live via Zoom is Randi Thompson, president of Kidsave, a Culver City-based nonprofit working to rescue orphans and foster families from the combat zone, as well as providing humanitarian aid. Randi, good morning to you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Morning. Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having us.
And thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. I mean, for people out there that may not be familiar with you, tell us a little bit about the organization and how your mission has shifted in the midst of what's happening in the Ukraine.
Sure. Kidsave is an organization that is dedicated to connecting older children in orphanages and foster care to permanent families or lifelong mentors to help them to succeed after they leave government care. We work in many countries. So we work in the United States, right here in Los Angeles, with kids in LA County foster care. We work in Colombia. We've worked in many, many countries. And in Ukraine, we've been there since 2016, both working with older kids, getting ready to leave orphanages, and also placing kids in local foster families and with local adoptive families. Since the conflict, we've shifted all of our priorities in Ukraine just to getting children and families out. We started with 3 people, just our core team on the ground, and the efforts now swelled to hundreds of people helping, and we've got more than 30 vans going into the combat areas, going and finding children and families, particularly those now who are left in the orphanages, and then getting them out to rescue center and over the border into whatever neighboring country they can get to as quickly as possible.
It's so disturbing and it's so horrifying when you watch the images that are playing out on TV. According to UNICEF, over 1 million children have fled the Ukraine in just less than 2 weeks. Where exactly do they go?
Well, there are volunteers waiting on the other side of the borders to help families and children get settled. If a child is an orphan and coming from an institutional environment, there are inviting organizations that say that they can take X number of children and they can put them temporarily in an SOS village or a shelter, or churches. A lot of churches have stepped up to have church families take children in as well.
And I also read, recently that adoptions, naturally is halted. And think the process is different in Russia because Russia doesn't allow U.S. citizens to adopt Russian children. So what does that mean for orphans in Russia if Russia continues to occupy Ukraine?
Well, Russia hasn't allowed American citizens to adopt children from there since 2012. And there are many Russian families that now take children in. So they've actually done, as much as I am not liking to speak much about Russia now, and the Russian people have stepped up to take kids in over the last several years as well. So they've been emptying their orphanages. That's what we're trying to do in Ukraine. I mean, in Ukraine, there were 106,000 children that were living in institutions just 3 years ago. And they've begun to empty those institutions as much as possible and get the children that could go back home. Mm-hmm. But there are still so many that were living in institutions. And that's what our work was doing pre-conflict, as we were working to introduce kids through the community programs that we had and having them staying with families who then ultimately would take them in permanently.
Mm-hmm. And for people out there that are watching that feel like they want to help, they can go onto your website, right, and look through your galleries that you have on there and see if there's somebody that they would like to adopt or support. So tell us about the process.
Well, we have children right now in the United States that need families, and we have kids from Colombia that need families. We're not bringing any Ukrainian children here. The goal with Ukrainian children right now is to keep the children as close to Ukraine as possible. So many of them have biological families that are still alive. And so they do not want to bring kids out of Ukraine and into the United States at this time. as the war goes on, we don't know what's going to happen, but we certainly have children in the United States and in Colombia that we're working with who do need adoptive families. Right now in Ukraine, though, we're working to buy as many buses and transport vehicles as we can to both transport humanitarian aid into the hospitals and the orphanages that are still there, and to get as many people out to safety as we can.
Randi, thank you so much for being with us this morning and giving us some perspective, and thank you so much for all the work that you're doing on the ground.
It's my pleasure. Let's all pray for a peaceful end to this conflict.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for more information...
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And for more information, everybody, about Kidsave and how you can help, visit kidsave.org.